even if we didn't have enough, we had to get started.
Giving away ministry, teaching doctrine, building people's faith, watching character grow, people become sanctified.
As a church planter, if you don't recognize that it's just going to take time, then you are in deep trouble.
Hi, I'm Brandon Briscoe, and welcome to another episode of The Postscript, Living Faith Bible Institute's weekly podcast and YouTube series devoted to interviewing pastors and professors from LFBI and across the Living Faith Fellowship. The Living Faith Fellowship is a network of churches that are like-minded, that gravitate towards one another in terms of missions and philosophy and theology. And we work together. And every year we host a conference in Cartersville, Georgia at Oakland Heights Baptist Church called the Discipleship Conference, where we focus our attention on the strategies and methodologies and philosophies associated with implementing a mentorship-based form of discipleship within each other's churches. And we help each other and we sharpen each other. It's a lot of fun. And like most conferences, there are evening speakers where everybody comes and gathers together and spends time together communally. But then also there are morning sessions. There's breakouts where we focus on topics that are specific and people can choose which breakout session they want to go to. And one of the breakout sessions from this last March, was one that was devoted to how to implement discipleship in the context of church planting. And church planting is a difficult work. It's very, very important, but it's also very difficult. It comes with very unique considerations in terms of handling and ministering the church activities and the way that we approach things. So it comes with its own set of problems. And discipleship is one of those things that needs to be understood. And we need some insight on what does it look like to bring discipleship into a church where a lot of the believers are young and new and everything is fresh and they don't have the same perspective or philosophies that you're bringing into that community. And so they have to be taught all those things. There's a lot of things associated with that we want to address today. And so we've brought in a ringer. We've brought in Pastor Dan Reneau of Living Faith Lee Summit here to talk to us about how his church implemented discipleship, what that looked like. You've been at it a minute.
Yeah.
How long has it been?
5.5 years.
5.5 years.
Yeah.
So it was a church plant at one point. It's probably can't really be constituted. You planted a church.
Yeah,
it
we
is
don't
now
use
a
the word
church.
anymore.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you're
we
no
don't
longer
use that
doing
word.
that work.
Yeah.
But I guess that's why you're the guy to talk to about this, because you have done it and it's still fresh enough where it's on your mind and you can remember what it was like to get going and get started and and how difficult it was.
Yeah.
So
Well,
you're the man, the ringer.
Yeah.
In fact,
I don't know about that, but I appreciate it.
So let's by the way, the conference was awesome. The session
It
that
was
you did,
good. I mean,
the session you
Cartersville, they take care of you when you're down there
Yeah.
too. They do a great
they're
job.
very loving.
Oh man. And it was a great conference.
Yeah, it was. It was a lot of
It
fun.
was good.
And your session was actually really insightful. And so there was a group of people that were there. I sat in because it's you and I wanted to be there. But there was a lot of people who are a part of church planting works right now that were there listening in because they wanted to get the skinny on what it looks like as they take each step in the process of getting their churches planted and what kind of hurdles they might run into. So you provide a lot of really good information for them. And can you give us the backstory on the church plant and some of the events surrounding it? Just give us a brief history of Living Faith Lee Summit.
The skinny of it is, we were starting Bible studies, and working together at Midtown, and we were starting Bible studies on the campus in homes. And a Bible study got started in a home, and actually multiple Bible studies were in this home.
Yeah.
And we started reaching out to the family as well, and God blessed that work. And it was about maybe 30 minutes outside of where Midtown Baptist Temple was.
Yeah.
And over time, it just became evident that through that Bible study, which was, we were wanting to reach out to our community, that through that Bible study, God grew it. And long story short, God confirmed it through the leadership here at Midtown Baptist Temple. And, January 2017, planted a church. And so
Wow.
it was pretty cool. Yeah.
And there's been a lot of kind of emanations, different buildings, different locations, different people, which we're going to kind of get into. There's a group that went with you for that initial thrust. Not everybody made it through. Some people did, some people didn't. And so in terms of the ebb and the tide of church planting, there is a lot of upheaval. There's a lot of issues that people don't think about when they're, as you referred to it, kind of the incubator or the biodome that is their local church. Here at Midtown Baptist Temple, we want a church plant. We want a church plant. We want a church plant. We're always talking about it. We're training, we're preparing, but it looks one way here in the safety of what we're doing. It looks a whole nother thing once you're out on the field.
Yeah. And at the conference, I talked about the greenhouse or like the lab.
Yeah.
And how your sending church is every bit a greenhouse. All of the conditions are strong. Most of the time, you'll have multiple pastors. You have people who have been making disciples and evangelizing, leading Bible studies
for generations,
who aren't even pastors.
Yeah,
they're just faithful members.
Yeah,
you have strong families. You have generations. Yes, generations is a big word. That you would think about with discipleship, and then and everything that you've learned from your church or your sending church, you say, I want to implement that,
right?
In another part of the city, another part of this world, and you firmly believe that what you were taught will work.
Yeah,
and you get out there and you're like, oh man, this is hard, So there was a lot of learning. I wouldn't say unlearning. That's not the right word, but just continued growth, continued learning. As we kind of launched out.
Yeah. I mean, it's one thing to exist within the greenhouse and be trained and to have a bunch of farmers. It's a whole nother thing to start in a hard field.
That's exactly right.
Where there are tares and there's different set of circumstances to deal with, to grapple with. And then now you're the farmer.
I will also say that at times, I remember this when I was even a younger believer, under Pastor Sam Miles, and even before Midtown Baptist Temple was planted at Kansas City Baptist Temple, he was the college pastor, and I was just one of the small group leaders. Man, my small group would grow to 20, 30, 40. We'd split. A year later, we'd split again. And you can have a little bit of an idea that, man,
I know how to do this.
I know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I'm discerning.
Right.
I'm a discipler, evangelizer. I know the book. And you fail to understand that a lot of the growth and a lot of the health of your Bible study, of your discipleship relationship, which is one-on-one, is actually also a product of a very healthy environment.
Yeah. Where
with a greenhouse, all of the conditions are perfect.
The tools are available, the resources are there.
And you don't have just one pastor, you got 8 or 9. And not only that, you have deacons and you have, staff and you have resources and tools that have not only been tested, but tried and proven to work. And so, in a mature church, cough, cough, someone else will take my place for children's ministry.
Yeah.
No one's taking your place at a church plant.
Yeah. You call in sick, there's
a big hole.
There's scrambling.
Yeah. And we're hurting, which, it's just a different dynamic. Yeah. And if you haven't ever done it before, it's hard to understand just how much you benefit from being a part of the lab, where it is 70 degrees every day. There's no dust. Yeah. There's all these things that there's nothing that's going to get in the way of the experiment working. Like it's going to work.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can even find yourself thinking, yeah, I must know what I'm doing. And I'll tell you, church planting can really.
Right. The dangers of an established church are a completely different set of dangers. Mechanization and becoming a monument.
Of course, but I would say it's still the goal.
Yeah.
It's still the goal.
Because once you've gone from walking and you've gone into running, you can set a pace. And if you're full of faith and you're trusting the Lord and you don't get proud, man, you can keep that pace for generation after generation after generation. And now, but the whole point though about what you're saying is the whole goal of church planting is to face these giants, tackle them, fight them in faith, and establish a discipleship ministry wherever it is that you're planning a church. The objectives, you've got the tool, you understand the goal, and you're there to do that. And of course, it's going to be hard.
And the concern is if you don't go in eyes wide open and you do get punched in the face a couple times, you run the risk of wanting to abandon ship which is what a lot of church planters do,
Yeah.
even of our ilk.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden they're saying, wow, it doesn't work like it did there.
Mm-hmm.
They must have something going on. Maybe there's a certain charisma. Maybe everyone's just, really, in love with the pastor, but I think we got to try something else. And it's not that.
Yeah.
It's not that you need to reinvent the wheel or change it. Now, every church is going to have its own way in which you're going to need to implement certain, processes, but, and at every stage too.
Yeah, culture and community affect
all of
those
those things. But the risk is that, especially with some of, our young people, they're going to have to go through some struggles if they're interested in church planting. And even if they're not the pastor going out, maybe they're part of the team. They're going to have to get to a place where they are trusting that the Lord is in this and that he used, and methodologies change, but he even used the methodologies that are present within our fellowship to do a great work.
Yeah.
And so there is a big risk that people can want to, run because it's just not working. I've told this story before, but I finished the book of Colossians, and I'm going to start teaching on the 9 principles of ministry enablement, something that Midtown Baptist Temple has as a core for how we can know that we're properly doing the ministry right. Biblical principles.
You're
found in
presenting the
Bible.
DNA.
And I'm trying to begin saying like, hey, this is who we are.
Yeah.
Well, when I said the word we, half of our church left. After we went through those summer months, I believe, and I believe this sincerely, that that's when God showed us, oh, okay, this is your group. This is the church.
So then at that moment, the natural thing is, let's start discipleship. Let's get the discipleship ball rolling, because when we say discipleship, we mean training, giving away ministry, teaching doctrine, building people's faith, watching character grow, people become sanctified. And we do that through a method that is a mentorship relationship. So it's generally a one-on-one meeting. And so, hey, it's time for us to really push the agenda of discipleship. At what point did you begin to see that was needed, and then how did you go about doing that?
Well, we want to do that right away.
Yeah.
I mean, discipleship is everything. That's the work of the church, to make disciples.
But did you have the leaders to do it?
Even if we didn't have enough, we had to get started.
Yeah.
We just had to.
Yeah.
At first, I was discipling 4 people at the same time, which is, there's some problems with that too, because you can't always get into the weeds one-on-one with a person, but it's just
by necessity.
It's just what you're going to do. And so, but we actually started in April. I invited everyone out to the house. Caroline and I, my wife, we fed everyone, come out if you want to know what discipleship is. We gave a philosophy of discipleship, kind of like, hey, what we're wanting to accomplish, and then said, sign up next Sunday if you're interested. And 4 months after we started, this is before the wheels fell off, about 25 people signed up. And so we're just thinking,
that's a great group.
Yeah. So that's when we started the, if you want to say,
formally presenting it to the church.
The mentorship that you're speaking of, the one-on-one time with one another. We started in April. And the great thing about it is that most of those people followed through. And I know that many of our listeners or people that are watching will know that we use, 18 lessons of discipleship. Most of our people that signed up went through that process. Usually takes about a year or so. And they successfully went through the 18 lessons. I mean, so I'm pretty excited. Not only do we have our launch team, but now we have about 20 to 25 people who in April of 2017 successfully, and I would say even the 4 goals of discipleship were being implemented in their lives. I mean, I'm not new to this. I'm not just wanting to get people through the lessons.
Yeah, you're saying ministers developed.
You can't call yourself a discipleship church just because you're going through lessons with people.
Right.
You can't call yourself a discipleship church just because
you have a process in place.
Someone's discipling someone.
Yeah.
That doesn't even make you a discipleship church. Well, everyone's discipling people. What's it producing?
Right.
That's the real.
The outcome is what's critical.
So I would say I'm still pretty excited though. I'm excited for what God is doing. And so discipleship 1, there are 4 goals of discipleship that we, the discipler, are trying to accomplish in the life of that person that we're leading. And so discipleship is not the lessons. It's not just, checking off boxes. I want to see, are these goals being present? But discipleship 2, which in LFBI is broken up into 2 semesters, Foundations 2 and 3. Discipleship 2, that's what we call it at our church, is the process to where, hey, if you're interested in not only being a disciple of Jesus Christ, not only a believer,
Right.
and not only a disciple, but actually a person who makes disciples, join us in this class. It's a 1 year journey, you know?
Yeah.
Well, many of those same people, yeah.
That sounds great. That's the next step. Let's do it.
I'm in.
Yeah.
And they're good people. And I would say the 4 goals of discipleship and changed and lives being changed, that was happening.
Yeah. Transformation was present.
It really was. And so well, let's do D2, discipleship 2. We get into it, and that's, now mind you, we started in January 2017. It's now August 2018. We're a year and a half into this. God's been all over it. We're thankful for his moving. And we go through the first semester. People are loving it.
Yeah, they're learning.
They're learning the Bible. People are saying, man, I never knew that I could know the Bible like this.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the stuff that you dream about.
Sure.
We keep going, and as we're getting closer to the end of the second semester of D2, it's April. And at the time, even though we had a building we used on Sundays, we used our basement. Like Carolina's our house, and we turned it into Discipleship 2. That's our classroom.
Yeah.
Our basement which was really a special time.
It was cool. You guys set it up nice too.
It was cool. Yeah. And so, but it's April, and the semester ends in May. And while I'm teaching, now you were a teacher before you came on full time as a pastor, but
right.
Did you ever have those times where you're teaching, but then there's like another you behind you?
Yeah.
And it's like,
there's words coming out of your mouth.
Here?
But,
you know?
Yeah.
So I had that experience. I'm teaching, I'm into it, and I'm looking around the room and I'm thinking, not a single one of these guys is ready to disciple. And that wasn't an insult. And I, even as I'm saying this now, I hope that's not understood that way. It was just that no matter that they had gone through the process of discipleship and they've gone through the process of D2 and they were ending and they were doing well and we had proper assessment to make sure that they weren't just going to a class.
Yeah.
It was April and I realized we got a long ways to go. And I was looking around the room while I'm teaching thinking, they're not ready yet.
Right.
And again, that sounds kind of conceited or elitist. And
well,
I don't
you're a
mean
teacher and you're a pastor, and you have to understand things in terms of can I entrust souls to these individuals or this individual specifically? Are they ready for me to hand them a baby believer?
It's a soul.
It's a soul.
You're entrusting them with a soul.
That's right. And so there's a question of what you're saying. There's a question of maturation, leadership maturation.
Yeah. And I didn't want to hurt them. I mean, ultimately, that's the main thing. You don't want a new believer to get hurt, but really, I don't want anyone to get hurt. I want them to grow. I had one guy who purposely didn't finish D2 because he was concerned I was going to assign him somebody.
He was afraid you were going to pair him
So
in
then
a
I talked to him later. I'm like,
relationship.
bro, just finish D2.
Yeah.
You can just finish the class.
Yeah.
I knew that you weren't there yet. But so I'm going through that process 2.5 years into our church plant. Now,
you're looking around and saying, wait.
Well, that took me a long time to get to that point, But really what it was is that it and one of the things I mentioned at the discipleship conference in our like breakout session was, as a church planter, if you don't recognize that it's just going to take time, then you are in deep trouble because you may be doing everything right. And that word can get you in trouble because at the end of the day, I think it's Psalm 127, except the Lord build a house.
Yeah.
You're wasting your time.
Yeah. The
That's
labor
the
is
Dan
vain.
Reneau version.
Yeah.
I get it. I'm not trying to say like, we were doing everything right, God bless us. I'm not trying to say it like that, but I am saying this. There was dependence on the Lord and prayer. We were studying the Word of God. We were leading people in discipleship for transformation. We were, even at that level, trying to put people into LFBI. There was levels of spiritual growth. And so you're looking and you're going, God, we're doing all these things, and Lord, what's going on?
Yeah. And I guess for the listener, I'm thinking about the listener right now, and they're like, well, what's the problem, Dan? You did follow the procedure. You did have the resources. You did do the things. what was wrong with their maturity? Why weren't they ready? What, you couldn't take a risk on them, Dan? So here's the question. Here's the question is, what were you looking for in their maturation that wasn't present? What was it that was missing that gave you reason to pause as a shepherd over a flock? There was a reason for you to pause. What were the things specifically that seemed to cause you to say to yourself, these folks, they're just not ready for the next step yet. We need to go harder. It's going to take more time.
That's a hard answer. There's so many things, and with each person, it was different.
Mm-hmm.
Pastor Sam Miles, he told me one time, maybe he said it many times, but he said, Dan, trees take time to grow. And I've said that statement now so many times, probably so many that people are going to start thinking I said it, but I usually try to give them credit.
But you know, Baptists are Baptist preachers are notoriously bad.
We just steal.
It's plagiarizing.
Yeah. So we'll get in heaven and we'll square up. I don't know. Or maybe at all church retreat. I don't know.
Yeah.
But no, that has stuck with me. You know, just that trees take time to grow. And again, let's go back to the greenhouse. If some of these young people and newly married people, or just people that were coming to our church, some saved, some not saved, some never having studied the Bible on their own, you know, all types of different levels. If I had 5 other pastors, healthy ministry fellowships, small group Bible studies throughout the city, they probably would have grown a little bit quicker. There'd been a lot of more conversation that would have been like saying the same things. Ministry running on the rails of relationships, right?
Yeah.
And so I think to a certain degree, it just meant that because this was harder ground and because this was new ground, that it was just going to take some more time, and I was going to have to continue to repeat myself. I'm going to have to keep saying the mission, because we've heard the mission.
Yeah.
We know the 9 principles. We know the 4 goals of discipleship. And it's said so much that it's easy for new people to catch on. Well, not when you have 45 minutes on a Sunday and that's it, because we're renting from a wedding event space, you know, and yeah, you have Bible studies and you're doing discipleship, but there wasn't that constant flow of just work. And I hate to say it like this, but working knowledge and doctrine being established. And again, it might sound like I'm trying to say this as like, woe is me. I'm actually celebrating what God does when he establishes a DNA in a church, in a healthy church. It took a ton of investment. And I can only speak for my experience at Midtown Baptist Temple. For Midtown Baptist Temple to become the discipleship church that it is, you don't just get that, and you don't inherit it. Now, there are certain things that you can inherit from your sending church, which is a blessing. And a lot of that's like heritage and a deep understanding of the scriptures. But you can't just say, this is the culture.
Yeah.
That takes a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. We just hadn't established that yet.
Right.
And so that's as much on us as it was on the new people, that we just need to keep saying the same thing, keep continuing in the doctrine that God has given us. And you know, Paul tells that to Timothy, hey, continue in the things that you've learned, the things that you've been taught. Keep going.
Yeah.
You don't have to reinvent it.
Yeah, and I like what you're saying. I think it's really important to understand. What you're saying is that fewer touch points in the day-to-day life of a believer is going to slow the process of discipleship in their life. But when they're in an environment where the touch points are everywhere, there's influences everywhere, the culture is everywhere, they're steeped in it, that saturation process takes place much quicker. It tends to.
Yeah.
But when it's, you know, when the water is shallow and everything is fresh and new, it takes longer for it to take, because there just isn't as many available touch points as there would be in another context, which is okay.
Even though it's hard, it's right. And it's good to do.
Yeah.
It's just, don't be bitter about it. Like, well, you know, my sent church, it always works there. It's like, well, no, that's great. And I actually want that.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that someday we'll have that as well. And I think God is actually doing that work. It's still growing.
Yeah.
But no, I'm not bitter. I'm actually like,
it's an important realization.
But it is an important realization. And I think it's healthy for even your launch team, because then if you don't check it, there's I don't know if it's bitterness, but a concern.
A disappointment even.
I don't know if we're doing it right.
Yeah.
And it's like, wait, listen, are putting our trust in this book.
Mm-hmm.
We are devoting ourselves to being a house of prayer. We want the virtue of Christ to be permeating our very lives. Let's keep going.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we get focused on performance. How many people are getting saved? How many baptisms? How big the church is growing? All this stuff that really, yes, baptism, salvations matter, but the performative aspect of church, man, God is not concerned with our performance.
Yeah, was it shiny enough this week that people want to come back? Or how many people did we have? Were they comfortable enough?
Obey the Lord. Just, obey Him, be submitted to Him, and know that He's your audience.
Yeah.
And
for sure.
We could go down that rabbit hole more, but
I think there's the points that you made at the conference, and there's some points that I want you to make now, because I think they hold a lot of value, is that when you made this discovery and you realized, okay, wait a second, this is just going to be harder. It's just going to take longer. Not a big deal. But there's things I need to do to make sure that we're ready. Like, I'm not quitting on these people. I'm moving forward, and we're going to continue to invest in them. But there's some things that you tweaked. There's some things that you did, things that you began to understand that needed to take place. And those are the things that you kind of taught. And you mentioned one, but I want you to keep going. You said repeating yourself. You had to repeat yourself a ton. And why is that important? And why do people need to recognize in a church plant setting that the repetition of philosophy, theology, even just the phraseology that comes with what we believe.
Even our fellowship of churches, some of the 4 goals of discipleship.
Yeah. Why is that important? And how did you begin learning how to do that?
Well, I think we could say stuff like LFBI. What does that mean? Now, most people that maybe are listening to this podcast know, because they've listened for a while.
Yeah.
But, MBT, LF. What?
Right.
LF.
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
Right.
And we use these terms or 9 principles. What I had to start realizing, and I think the first main point that I had was that it's going to take time. That was my first point at the Discipleship Conference, is that if you go into church planting, whether you're the pastor or you're part of the team, and you are not cognizant of the fact that it's just going to take time, you're going to be so discouraged. You are going to be so discouraged. The second thing I said is, in the process of that, okay, this is a long haul. You better know that you're going to have to repeat yourself and repeat the mission. And there's a couple reasons for that. Is because some people will say, yeah, I got it. And they don't got it. And then there's times you'll say, do you guys know what I mean? Everyone know what I mean? Oh, yeah, we know. No, they don't.
Yeah.
They don't know what you mean.
Right. They're nodding their heads up and down.
Yeah, exactly. Just because someone is communicating truth doesn't mean that they're going to actually be able to apply that to their life or understand it on a deep level. And I got to keep saying it then.
Yeah.
And I say things so many times. I mean, I repeat it and I repeat it and I repeat it till people are like, we got it.
Let's take a moment right here to hear from Pastor Mike Reneau of Living Faith Boston.
Hi, I'm Mike Reneau, pastor at Living Faith in Boston, Massachusetts. And if you're considering learning the Word of God, Living Faith Bible Institute would be a good place for you. The good thing about LFBI is that you're not just learning from an academic standpoint. You're learning from actual practitioners that do, in fact, know the book. These are pastors and men who are leading churches, doing the work themselves, since they can give you a firsthand, real-life knowledge of what it means to learn the Bible in that context. Some of you may have a call in your life for the pastorate, to be a missionary, to serve the Lord in other parts of the world. Living Faith Bible Institute can prepare you in a way that you can be equipped with the Word of God and given practical tools, being held accountable in your ministry right where you're at. If you're interested in learning more, or you want to enroll in LFBI, go to lfbi.org.
When you mentioned this at the conference, the thing that came to my mind is that a lot of space in the pulpit has to be devoted, despite what you want to teach and what you want to get into and what you're prone to, like you want to go down that rabbit trail and teach those things, and that's going to take you 10 minutes to do. Despite the fact that you want to do that, you have to hit pause and take time to define the terms. And so I just imagine that affect everything that anytime you're in front of people, you're making sure that you pause long enough to explain what you mean when you say discipleship, what you mean when you say sanctification, what you mean when you say Living Faith Bible Institute, or
when I say salvation, eternal security, baptism,
basic things.
These concepts, the deity of Christ. That's the thing is because it's like when someone becomes so proficient in a field that when all of a sudden you put them in front of like a 5-year-old, explain what you do, and they're just going, I don't even know how to start, because they're so ingrained in it. I think sometimes we can be so ingrained in what we know, and then I assume you know, and because actually you and I would be able to converse on a, I can't say high level, but on maybe a deeper level in some ways, we can spit back and forth. I have to understand that, and I have to assume that we are not on the same page. And again, that might sound condescending, but it's not intended to. It just means that I'm not going to speak to my 9-year-old like he's 18. I'm not going to speak to an 18-year-old like they're 40. I have to know, like, okay, this is where they are. And if I expect them to understand vocabulary that's beyond them, and I don't teach them the vocabulary, well, shame on you.
It's making me think back. I don't know if you remember the policy that came out of the Bush administration for public education that they referred to as No Child Left Behind, which was basically a really terrible curriculum and system and structure and ideology. But the sentiment was right. And it's one that I think that we should have as pastors and shepherds, is that there's no sheep left behind. And I can't continue to let this train move down the track knowing that there are cars on the train that are decoupling and they're falling behind. The only way to do that is to be loving enough to take your time to explain. Like, this is actually what I mean when I say, and really make sure that what this next point I think that you're going to come to is that DNA is being transferred, because terminology has a lot to do with DNA.
And terminology, not just for the sake of like, this is what we say at Living Faith, but as it relates to doctrine.
Yes.
Let's use biblical terms to define our biblical position on what it means to be a church.
Well, you know as much as any that we don't, when we say things, we mean one thing, and Calvinists say the same words and they mean something completely different. So if you're in a Reform camp, we could be speaking the same vocabulary, but the definitions behind those things are not always the same. And that's true even at a micro level within the context of your own church.
And that's, I think, going back to when did I realize that maybe we weren't where we needed to be, was, did people know the term? I've heard it. Got it. What about a working definition? And that was where maybe I was noticing I need to back up and maybe not back up, but I just need to double down. And I need to continue to make sure that what I'm teaching is at times maybe higher level, more broad, but it's going to be beneficial for us. It's going to get us to a place where at some point we will have a core or a team that can continue to communicate those things.
So tell us about the DNA part. And then how does that affect whether or not you're actually establishing discipleship as a culture? Those two concepts.
Going back to Midtown again with, that's where I have a lot of my, growth and development. That took a lot of time. Okay, that was the first point I was making at the conference, that and Sam would say that. That the things took a lot of time. And he one time told me, I was discipling a young man, he goes, "It's frustrating. Don't be frustrated." Was that when you were discipling me? Well, we'll keep that. But I thought, wow. It was almost like a Yogi Berra, kind of statement, where you're like, wait, what? I've told other people that statement and they're like, what? That's not a good quote.
No,
but
it's
that was
beautiful.
It was big for me.
It applies to so many things. Like, I know it's frustrating. Don't be frustrated. I know it's disappointing, but don't be disappointed. In other words, I know that this thing is tempting you to be distraught or disappointed or to walk away or to be frustrated. I know it's tempting you that direction, but it's your choice whether or not you own that incongruence.
And the frustration was in regards to discipleship. I wanted something for this person, right? And at times I was like, come on, But in reality, what God was showing me is that my contentment was being found in my circumstances rather than in Christ, and rather just in the simplicity of the cross and what he's done. Man, it's grace. It's the grace of God. That's what I need to be, And so that kind of stuff starts to help you continue to realize, let's keep diving into this repetition of mission, of vision, and being willing to take the time. I tell people this all the time at Living Faith, conversations. And this might sound weird, but I'm actually okay being the devotional pastor. Because for the most part, most of our people, they're having problems with their marriages or having problems with how to raise their kids. And not to say that we should not speak to eschatology, and not to say we shouldn't speak about all these things.
And you're still expositing Scripture.
Of course. And that's why I'm saying people are going to go, what?
Yeah.
But we're not going to get there, right? And maybe some people will have a different opinion on that. No, if we teach, all these things, they'll be able to apply it. I just believe that people need to see it work in their life. Mm-hmm. And it has to be real. It just can't be some liturgy. Mm-hmm. It can't just be some kind of code of ethics.
Or an academic exercise.
That's exactly right. Yeah. It has to work. When that happens, that's when someone goes, this works.
Yeah.
But it has to really impact our lives. The church has to stop just teaching in such a way to where we're academic in our pursuits. Are we cool? Are we all cool? We all understand eternal security. Yeah. We all understand baptism. We all understand these, the 18 lessons of discipleship. And no, I not only do I understand it, but
I can teach others, and I live out those truths in every aspect of my life.
It's flowing out of me.
Yeah.
It has to be that virtue element that's lacking a lot of times in 2 Peter chapter 1. Add to your faith knowledge.
We want to skip virtue. Yeah.
Yeah. And because virtue affects my heart. You look up virtue in the Bible, and the times that it refers to Christ, power.
Yeah.
There's power coming out of him. Mm-hmm. And when you think about that, well, add to your faith the power of God.
Yeah.
And then we'll get
faith materialized. It's grace materialized.
Yes. Yeah. People want to use that word incarnational. That's a hot word that was 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
But really, you look like Jesus. Mm-hmm. The virtue of Christ is flowing through. That starts to get you DNA.
Yeah.
Because you could teach till you're blue in the face, but once people start going, no, this is actually working.
Yeah.
This has changed my life, my marriage, my kids. So I don't know if that helps.
So did you see these things beginning to impact the discipleship ministry? I mean, did you see, how was it that this played itself out?
I think you say the same thing enough times to where someone realizes, oh, and that's when it happened. I just saw it, right? Where I had a grad school instructor one time, I think he said, it takes 7 years before, the things that someone else has taught you to become your own words. This is a carnal, secular teacher, but I thought, well, that's interesting, that it takes a while for those words that you learn to not only be like, well, Brandon says, there's going to come a point where hey, listen, this is what you need to do.
Yeah.
And you're no longer thinking what your pastor thinks. You're thinking, well, this is what's right, because you've seen it now proven in your life.
Yeah, you used a few examples. I know that you've talked about the KJV issue as one of those things, because obviously we hold a position.
Yeah.
There's a lot to learn about that position. I mean, there's a historical perspective. There's internal evidence from Scripture that proves that we should have a preserved word. There's all these kind of, working pieces that can be talked about. And there's a lot to study there. You went to a Bible Institute to learn that, but you learned it through life and conversing about it, and many conversations and late nights and doing your own studying and reading your own books. And it takes time. But you mentioned even just the King James thing, you want to take it for granted. You just want to say, oh, okay, this is what we do. People believe it. This is why we believe it.
Yeah.
Easy breezy, move on. Right.
Well, and that's the thing too, so it's 2018 and, we're cooking. I mean, and God is blessing. And, at times it might sound like I was being critical. You know this because we've had conversations. Man, we couldn't have been happier. God was doing such a great work. It's just that we were realizing it's going to take a little bit longer, right? And one of those things that you benefit from having a healthy church is that, again, everyone is communicating the same things. The perfect conditions are set. Well, you're not there. And we've never done the YKJV series. And people haven't gone through LFBI's manuscript evidence. And, not every small group leader, is well-versed. Maybe they're well-versed, but they're not deeply knowledgeable to teach it, from a historical standpoint. And so even that was something where we got to go, wait a second, if we're going to have disciplers, they need to have a working knowledge of why we use the King James.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't happen. And okay, people can, as you're going through discipleship, you and I both know this, that a person as they're going through discipleship can go, okay, I'm in.
But not everyone's that way.
And not everyone's that way. And also not everyone can teach that, to such a degree to where the church is bought in.
Yeah, just because you believe it doesn't mean you can explain it at a mastery level.
And we're going to get weak sauce quick if, I understand it. And maybe even some guys that are with me on the launch team, they can communicate it. That third generation, if we're not consistently teaching why we hold to a single authority of God's word, we're getting back to that place where it worked at Midtown because they had something going and it was good. But I just don't know if it's going to work here. And now you're entertaining things that you would have never entertained.
Yeah. Well, we've seen it happen in churches.
It's not a hypothesis.
No.
It's actual.
Yeah.
And the reality is it's not that it doesn't work. It's that we're not actually seeing real discipleship take place in our church. Maybe that's a different conversation, but
but here's the principle that I think of: train up a child in the way he should go. Okay, and when he is old, he shall not depart.
Yeah.
Okay, so we assume that we actually taught. That's the problem. Is that sometimes we assume that we actually did the teaching because the kid was in our house, or because we took them to church, or we did the things that we thought we were supposed to do. But the truth is, sometimes we take for granted that we didn't actually teach or train. We didn't actually do the training part. Right. And we want the outcomes of someone that trained. But so I guess my point is the same thing is true at the church.
Yeah.
Right. You have to be ready and willing to adapt and train to meet the need or the deficiency that you see. And the King James is just only one of those issues. There's plenty of issues. You have to see the deficiency in the field and you have to be ready to respond to it.
And your example is so true in the sense, and when does a child buck against the training of a parent? When things get hard. If I'm telling my son or my sons or daughter, hey, this is how to do things, and there's no opposition and it works, okay, Dad. It's when it doesn't seemingly work, then all of a sudden you're looking at Dad and you're like, Dad must not know. Well, I need to tell my son in adversity, in sickness and in health, in prosperity and adversity, like the wedding vows. I'm like, hey, son, there's going to be opposition on this principle.
Yeah.
There's going to be some difficulty. You'll be challenged, but let's talk about why we still hold to this position. We have to do that with our disciples.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we always are following through with that.
Yeah.
And then real discipleship potentially isn't happening in the sense where I've taught you, I've taken you through the lessons, but what I want to see in real discipleship is not only did you finish the lessons, and maybe not only do you have the 4 goals. Real discipleship is when I see you doing the same thing.
Yes. Yeah.
Generational discipleship taking place.
Yeah.
That's where you want to see the movement.
There's so much we could talk about concerning this topic. I think Dan and I are not brief about anything. I think so. When we sit down together, we could probably go for like another 3 or 4 hours and just keep talking about different things related to church planting and this issue of establishing disciple makers. For the people at your church that listen to the show, I think it's important for them to hear all the ways in which you see discipleship taking place in their church. And I think it's also important for the church planters that listen to this show to hear how enduring works. Like there's value in enduring and not quitting.
Keep going.
And sticking to it and believing the Lord for things that seem impossible.
You have to dig deep. you have to know it's going to take time. You have to continue to repeat yourself till you think you've said it too many times, even with your leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Some of your leaders, you're thinking, I'm having to tell you this, you have to continue to reiterate the vision and the mission. You have to remind yourself, and before I maybe answer that last question, there was one more point that I'd like to make if we can, which was really important for me, especially for the church planter, is that not everyone who says they're on your team is going to actually be on your team.
Mm.
That's a hard one to realize, is that there's going to be some people who, like Ezra chapter 4, hey, we want to help you in the work.
Mm-hmm.
And Zerubbabel says, you have no part in this, because they were adversaries. They professed themselves as being followers of God, but they really weren't a part of the work.
Yeah.
Now, that was a hard lesson for me, because I was we'd have new people, and I would say, okay, let's try to find ways to get them into the work. Baby steps, but still I was taking chances a little bit, probably chances I wouldn't have taken if I was at Midtown.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're taking some chances, and I got bit a couple times, not like giving them leadership positions, but
yeah, they let you down.
I'm hoping. And what you find is that there are people that are not on your team who say they're on your team, but in reality, they have their own agenda. They're not willing to submit. And not that you need to be careful, but you need to be circumspect and wise. Hold on to the vision. And what will expose those individuals is if you do keep repeating, and if you go deeper. If you continue to say, we are going to be a church of depth, of spiritual depth, which means, yes, repetition, but also as time is spent, I'm going to spend time with the church to where we're not going to be novices in the word. And so we're going to be able to sniff out when someone is saying something contrary to what it is. Going back to your question, though, I would say 2 Timothy 2:2 is such a great verse for discipleship. And there's 4 generations of individuals in that: Paul, Timothy, faithful men, and others also. I truly believe that and we're not fully there at Living Faith, but that is one of the primary goals you want in a church, is you want to be able to look back and say, are there, and I would even say as an individual, are there 4 generations? I'm not saying did I disciple 4 people? I've discipled 4 people.
Right.
No, I'm talking, can I look back and in my life see how God has used me in this person's life? And then can I, because I'm still discipling that guy, can I see how he has turned around and started discipling another cat? And even though I might not be as connected to that guy, I'm still grandfather a little bit, and I try to have dinner with him maybe once or twice a year.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that as this guy is discipling that 4th generation, we can look back and we can say, I think a DNA is being established.
Yeah.
And so then we're not just going, shucks, I don't know. No, the Bible actually gives us the answer. When do you know that you're not the church planter? When do you know when the DNA is being established? I think you're looking for those 4 generations.
Yeah.
I think you're looking for, and I'm talking meaningful.
Yeah.
And again, it can't just be that, well, I discipled this guy and he discipled him. I mean, he doesn't really do anything, but and he discipled somebody because he's faithful and he's not having an affair. It's
Right.
like we all of a sudden dumb it down, and it's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
No, I want to see, like, okay, how was I used in so-and-so's life, and how are they being used? And if I can see those 4 generations, more than likely, you're doing something good. And God is at work. And obviously, Psalm 127, except the Lord build a house, we labor in vain. But that's a big marker for me. I'm looking for that in Living Faith.
Yeah, that's good.
Are we establishing believers in that way? And am I seeing them make disciples?
Are you?
Well, here's the cool thing. In 2017, we discipled a couple. And just last year, so 2017, 2018, that was discipleship for us with them. 2021 is when they got partnered with their own couple, and they're walking through discipleship with them even right now. And so, it doesn't always look like that. And there are people who are bringing people even in a natural way where they're bringing people to the Lord and then they are discipling. And so we're seeing even with the ideal setting even too.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that first batch of disciples back in 2017, they're now making disciples.
Yeah, that's great.
And so it's pretty cool.
It's very exciting.
Yeah, it's a cool thing. Yeah. And that's only one couple. I mean, I could go on.
Sure.
There's so many people, and God has given us a team of people. Some of those guys were there at the beginning, but like Hunter and Carla Spiza, they helped me a ton with our discipleship process of pairing people. I meet with our small group leaders, and I'll text them or I'll talk to people to see, about
input.
Getting input. And so now we have.
It's a church-wide affair.
It's really a cool thing. We just had a leaders meeting last night, and for all of our leaders meetings, we sit down and talk about the people that are currently in discipleship and just say, hey, how are things going? And how can we pray? And so there's a culture of discipleship that's really starting to develop. It's neat.
Well, Dan, I can say, on behalf of LFBI and really, I'm sure on behalf of Living Faith Fellowship, when we see your church, it's a blessing because it inspires a lot of other pastors to either choose to plant churches or encourages them to continue on. I mean, the network of churches called the Living Faith Fellowship, and even, in fact, LFBI was established in 2013, so it's still a fledgling work in many regards. But we're beginning to see God work in churches like yours, or like in Northside, or like in Tampa, or like in Ireland, and we're beginning to see generational church planting even, taking place. And so the testimony
that's exciting.
Of Living Faith Lee Summit is critical to everybody. It builds our faith in it, and thank you for saying yes to the Lord, and I want to thank Living Faith Lee Summit for saying yes to the Lord and continuing on, because it's going to be a blessing to many, many other people who are going to go out and do the exact same thing that you guys did.
Well, I'll tell you this. I am very excited for what God is doing at Living Faith and Lee Summit. But, and we talk about church planting ourselves as a church, like we talk about it on a regular basis. Partly why I'm so excited is because I can't wait to give Pastor Sam Miles a call and say, hey, you got to preach at our church that we, by God's grace and by the Holy Spirit's leading, sent out.
Yeah.
And
ordination services.
In some way, that's what gets me excited because I'm not going to be an island to myself. And this is why the fellowship is so healthy for us, is that we have brothers in Christ, especially on the pastoral level, who can keep each other accountable, but can just love on one another. And we have a fellowship of churches that can say, man, we got your back.
Yeah.
And especially for the new works where it is hard. I mean, it's hard.
Yeah.
But if God would give us the grace to be a church planting church, well then, maybe I'm taking the passage out of context a little bit, but 2 Timothy 2:2, well, then for me personally, I got Midtown, Living Faith, and maybe XYZ. We're 3 of those generations.
Yeah.
And that's when I think even on a church level, or in a fellowship level, you can say, this isn't just an idea. This isn't just a concept or something we want to fancy as calling ourselves this thing. It works.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
That is exciting.
To be a part of something like that.
Well, Dan, I love you. Thank you for being with us.
I love you too.
For today's episode. And I think the things that you shared are going to be really beneficial long term. This is going to be an episode that people go and they say, okay, we're getting ready to church plant, or things have been hard recently. What episode was that with Dan where he's talking about how hard it can be? I think I need that right now. It'll be one that people can go back to and listen to and gain from. So thank you for sharing with us.
Man, absolutely.
And we want to thank you guys as well for joining us for this episode of The Postscript. I do want to point out to you that LFBI and the Living Faith Bible Institute and the professors such as Dan, are giving their lives to training up generations of people to do this kind of work, this very work. This isn't a seminary where we offer, lots of different degree programs and lots of different options. The objective for us personally is not to create academics or professorials or intellectuals that can, that are theologians in the word or whatever it might be. We're not a school for scholars necessarily, We want to be scholarly, but our objective is very clear. We want to establish church planters. We want to establish missionaries. We want to establish leaders in local churches that know how to reproduce life into other people. We believe in discipleship, and that's what we're giving ourselves to. And we do believe that what we have is unique in some regards. And so if you are interested in discipleship, if you're interested in church planting, if you're interested in answering a call on your life to follow the Lord and to do a work, whatever it is that he's calling you to do, we want to help equip you. And we want to invite you to visit lfbi.org and check out our program of study, check out who we are, and learn more. If you need to reach out to us, please do that. But we love you, and we do want to see God work himself out in your life. We want to see God's grace on you, and we're praying that he's doing that even now, even using this episode. And with that, we want to say God bless and see you again next week for another episode of The Postscript. Thanks for listening to The Postscript. If you enjoy the show, please leave us a rating and review in order to help other people find our podcast. If you value this show, please help us continue creating content by supporting Living Faith Bible Institute at lfbi.org/support.